Are you dealing with a spouse's depression? Well, hi, I'm Guy Ardito, relationship expert, trainer, and author. And today I want to talk about how to deal with a spouse's depression. Because, oftentimes a depression is the source of marital problems instead of being the result of them. A lot of people think that they're depressed because the marriage isn't working and that creates a cycle. But oftentimes somebody is dealing with depression and that has a huge impact, huge negative impact on the marriage, which causes that cycle. Because, when a partner is really depressed, it puts a strain when they can't live up to being a partner. It puts a strain on the marriage when they can't live up to being a friend. It puts a strain on a marriage when they can't live up to being a lover. And even if you are a happy, positive person, the constancy of the negativity of a partner who is depressed just kind of keeps chipping away at you. And inevitably, over time, it's going to start bringing you down. And then you guys are locked in a really bad cycle that's tough to break out of. So just for a little bit of background, I have actually battled depression myself, from mild through very severe, from the time I was a little kid until, frankly, my early 30s. And it's only looking back through the perspective of where I am in life now that I can see the impact that it had on my family, on my friends, on my career, and on my ability to start a relationship and maintain a relationship. So, I've been there and I know. So let me just take a couple of moments and talk about some of the common myths around depression. A big myth is that if somebody is depressed, they can't have fun, that they never laugh or smile, that they don't want to be around people, they kind of want to be to themselves, or that they just can't get anything done because, they're just moping and down and they can't get out of bed. And, sometimes that is true, right? But that's really in the most acute situations when they represent in a particular way. And there are many different ways that people can present depression. And I'm going to get into those in just a minute. But these are all myths, right? So somebody can be outwardly smiling and perky and actually inside be very depressed. So it becomes a little bit tricky. So what are some truths around depression, right? We handled a couple of myths. What are some important truths? Well, number one, like I said, it manifests in different ways. And according to the person, mild or severe depression can manifest in different ways, both because of severity as well as because of the individual's personality, conditions, and surrounding. Also, depression can come and go in waves, right? Sometimes it's a very clear constancy with somebody, but it can be up and down and up and down. Somebody can have great days or great times, right? And then depressed days or depressed times. Sometimes it is a kind of classic Dostoevskian extreme depression of, just somebody can't even lift their head up, right? You kind of recognize the posture's kind of hunched over and their head is down. And they're just kind of like that, even the breathing, right? Everything is pointless. But the reality is that more frequently, it's kind of like having, a gauze or a dirty windshield in front of you all the time or most of the time. It kind of takes the sheen off of life. And it's important to recognize that it can be cultural, right? Especially for people from Eastern Europe or Central Europe or Russia, there's a very large cultural component of depression. So it may not even have an organic source. But the point is that by adopting those cultural ways of being, it still has the same effect. It still winds up taking root as depression for the person, even though they don't recognize, because everyone around them or everyone who was around them seems to be that way. But it still has a depressive impact on them and certainly the people around them. So how can you recognize depression if it manifests differently in different people? Well, you can get very complex, but I'm going to keep this straightforward for you. And I'm going to divide it up into two realms. One is the realm of attitude or emotion, and the other is the realm of physiology or how you might see someone being, right? So in terms of attitude, a couple key words that you want to think about are hopeless and helpless, right? Depression can very easily be associated when you feel that whatever you're upset about, whatever is not good enough, basically can't be turned around. And it's just not going to get better, and they don't have the skills to turn it around. So it's kind of like hopelessness and helplessness, right? It can't get better and or I can't make it better, right? Those conditions are very closely tied to depression. So when you start believing that or seeing things that way, then depression is either coming up right behind you or already there. Kind of what's the point? Why bother attitude, right? That is something to look out for. A general lack of enthusiasm, a persistent negativity, a muted affect, right? So the upbeat emotions, for example, of smiling and laughter being infrequent or less frequent and or just kind of muted down compared to the negative emotions. But it's also possible for somebody who's depressed to even not outwardly radiate acute negativity. It's just kind of like a black hole of sucking all the emotion in the room up, as well as anxiety, right? Somebody can be presenting in ways of anxiety when they're dealing with depression. And there's actually a well-documented loop and linkage between anxiety and depression that's worthwhile understanding. And then there's a physiology, right? So a few key points to keep in mind: headaches, body aches, cramping, especially when they've been checked out by a doctor and another source has not been found, right? These are very closely tied to depression. Also, difficulty sleeping, as in an inability to get asleep or an inability to stay asleep, as well as conversely, sleeping a full night and having difficulty getting out of bed. So those are some attitudes or emotional ways, as well as some physiological ways of recognizing depression in someone. So now the question might be, well, how do you treat it? And there are many different approaches. These days, medication is looked at as kind of a panacea, but the reality is that we tend to acclimate. Different drugs work or don't work on any given person. There's a lot of experimentation that has to be done with dosaging. There are almost always side effects, and almost always, over time, the person begins to acclimate to the medication, which requires taking higher and higher dosages or experimenting with new medications. That being said, at a minimum, medication can be very effective to break somebody out of that depression, so they can start to step back, look at the situation, and actually make other changes and then grade themselves off of medication. Long-term, physiology and focus training can be just as effective and even more effective than medication. And what I mean by that is training the mind how to think, what to pay attention to. Instead of looking at the negatives, looking at the positives of the situation. You train yourself to do that. Same thing when your body is kind of hunched over, compressing breath. That's going to be generally more depressive. By training your body to be more open, to be more up, to be more receptive, that is shown to have a really positive impact. Also, two key beliefs: a belief that things can get better and a belief that you have the ability to make them better are extraordinarily important in breaking out of depression and staying out of that depressive state. And then finally, if your partner is going through this, how do you handle it? How do you help them? Well, the number one thing that you want to keep in mind is that nobody wants to be told you're depressed. Nobody wants to be accused of anything. So this is where the partnership and teamwork aspect of marriage really comes into play. You've got to have that trust and compassion. Ideally, you already have that in your relationship when you start to reach out to your partner to help them. Of course, if you've been getting frustrated, even resentful over time by their depression, it's going to be that much harder to do. And in fact, some of that trust might be shaken on both of your parts, and the compassion might be hard to summon up. But you've really got to do that. You need to be coming from a place of concern, right? And concern about them and concern about children if they're present, as opposed to concern about yourself or just being pissed off, right? That's relevant, but that's not the most important part. It's not where you want to lead with. You want to explain the impact of how they seem to be is having on the relationship and on family, right? Because sometimes they really don't see the effect. And again, I've been there myself, so trust me on this one. You want to help them create a positive vision of where they can get to, right? Because again, one of the big things with depression is those two big words, right? Hopelessness and helplessness. They oftentimes have difficulty seeing that the situation can turn around from where they're at. They might even not realize that, I said again, they're in a depressive place. They're being negative. They just kind of expect, because of maybe their culture or their friends, what they see around them, that however things are the way they are. So you've really got to keep working at showing things can be better, help generate that positive image and draw them towards it. You can also offer to help them in any way you possibly can. That can involve finding doctors, going on doctor's visits, helping them practice at home with any of their exercises for focus and such, as well as deciding what kind of might be a good treatment plan that would work for them. So you have a combination between psychologists, medication, and coaching, right? And medication needs to get prescribed. Sometimes it will be by your general physician. More typically, they'll want it to get prescribed by a psychiatrist. But these days, in terms of the talk therapy, that generally is not what psychiatrists do anymore. And that's going to be taken up by a psychologist. And certainly, when somebody's having much more severe and chronic problems going on, it's good to bring a psychologist into play. If this is something that's more recent or they're dealing with potentially less severe issues, then a coach can be a great person to work with. And frankly, even if they're seeing a psychologist, working with a coach as well, that is in tandem at the same time, can be very, very effective. So I know this post has been a little longer than most of them, a little more detail rich, but this is a really, really important topic because we are dealing with a huge amount of depression these days, frankly. And I hate to use the word diagnosed or undiagnosed, but it's certainly, in my experience, is going unappreciated in terms of how extensive it is, as well as unappreciated in terms of the effects it can have down the line. And oftentimes we have a lot of shame around it. We feel it's a personal thing. But again, if you're in a marriage or even a long-term relationship with somebody, you kind of have a commitment to work together as a team to help each other out through better and through worse. And sometimes, like I said, people don't even realize that they're caught up in a depression or they don't know how to find a way out. And that's where you've got to really step up your game as their friend, as their partner, as their lover, to help them with that, not just for themselves, but for the two of you, as well as any children that might be in the situation. So I hope you found that useful. Again, I'm Guy Ardito. If you're interested in any of my online training programs or coaching with me, either yourself one-on-one or with your partner with me, you can go to my website, guyardito.com. That's GUYARDITO.com for more information on that. In the meantime, remember, life is an adventure. Live in love.